London: A Case Study of Social Housing Supply Strategies. Why London? Similarly to Sydney, in London housing affordability is a major problem because housing supply is not keeping pace with demand. Affordability in both cities has deteriorated over the last 20 years, and both cities are now in the midst of housing affordability crisis. In the UK, housing affordability is in such a crisis that it was a key issue in the recent general election. Like Sydney, London is experiencing rapid population growth, possibly its fastest growth in history. London is also Europe's fastest growing city. To make matters worse, both London and Sydney are expecting population growth of around 1 million people over the next decade, putting further pressure on housing prices. The sustained population explosion at a time when there is chronic undersupply of new housing due to the financial crisis and recession is fueling the housing affordability crisis. Rents in London are rising at double the national rate, and like Sydney, there are ever-increasing numbers of people seeking social housing, but the stocks are at all-time lows. In both London and Sydney, middle and low-income earners are being exiled to the fringes of the city and away from infrastructure and jobs, causing significant negative socio-economic impact effects. Another similarity between London and Sydney is that we share the similar political and planning systems, and in both cities, social housing costs continue to rise while government investment is declining. The provision of social housing has become one of the most pressing challenges and is threatening the vitality of both cities. Therefore, effective strategies are a priority issue for both London and Sydney if they are to remain successful and sustainable global cities. Has adopted a mix of strategies to supply social housing, including capital subsidies and fiscal incentives in the form of government grants, but are also planning levers and developer incentives. Essentially, there are two main sources of funding to supply social housing in the UK: taxpayers and private developers. In the UK, the planning system is used to leverage social housing stock by making it a requirement of the development. Known as S106 agreements, local planning authorities negotiate with developers to seek financial and other contributions, such as social housing, before planning permission is granted. Essentially, developers fund the building of social and affordable homes by cross-subsidising the profits they make from market properties. In well-performing areas like London, where there are relatively more development is occurring, comparatively higher quantities of social housing are being built in preferred locations. Housing associations have taken over councils and are now one of the main suppliers and managers of affordable homes in London and the UK. They are not-for-profit organisations that use rent revenue and government funding to maintain existing housing stock and finance development of new homes. In 2010, the incoming Conservative government cut grants to housing associations by 63%. As a result, housing associations have built fewer homes and the onus has been placed on the private sector developers to build social housing through S106 agreements. Despite the GFC and government cuts, London has 368 housing associations who own and manage 430,000 properties, housing 1 in 10 Londoners. They build a third of all homes in the UK and approximately 10,000 new homes every year in London, which equates to 1 in 4 new homes. In recent years, housing associations have become less reliant on government subsidies and grants. They are assessing the risk, borrowing and reinvesting surpluses, and building increasingly more new social houses. Over the last 8 years, 100,000 affordable homes have been built in London, and about a third was through S106 planning agreements. The average affordable yield from these deals is 34%, which is significant given the economic climate of recent years. While the planning system and housing associations are making modest but increasing contributions to affordable housing supply, the overall provision of social housing is falling in London, and much more must be done if supply of homes is to keep up with demand. In 2012, the UK's Conservative government implemented reforms to make the planning policy system less complex to invigorate home building. Major business groups such as London First have recommended establishing a London-wide scheme setting up minimum number of affordable houses per unit development to add more certainty to the planning process and increase housing supply. However, the Conservative government plans to expand the right to buy policy to housing associations. This will cripple housing associations and send them bankrupt. Although it may be good politics, right to buy is poor policy as it stimulates demand and not supply and will only exacerbate the housing crisis. This case study of London reveals the importance of clear and consistent national planning framework with affordable housing as a key objective and concrete housing contribution requirements to ensure that the supply of social housing in new developments. Compared to London, the use of the urban planning system to increase supply of social housing outcomes in Australia has been extremely limited. Given the high value markets of Sydney and London, the mandatory approach requiring compulsory minimum social housing contributions would result in the supply of far more social houses. However, changes to the state planning policy would be required in New South Wales. Despite significant funding cuts to a large proportion of social homes in London and the UK are built by housing associations. However, Australia lacks financial incentive schemes to encourage the development of a not-for-profit housing sector. Compared to London, in Australia, housing, particularly social housing, has not been a priority of the federal or state governments. The London example has shown that without strategic government and private investment, the social and affordable housing crisis will not be addressed, and the use of planning levers alone will not achieve the supply of social housing that the city requires. Both cities will need to lobby and collaborate with the state and federal governments and other private partners to achieve radical change, bold action, and political will required to encourage development of social housing and achieve their goals.